Timeless is about to see some massive changes with Modern Horizons 3 hitting Magic Arena soon. In this video I bring you 3 deck ideas that I think could have some potential in the upcoming Modern Horizons 3 Timeless metagame. I didn't make sideboards as in the light of a huge metagame shakeup like this it seems a bit silly to spend a lot of time on that. However, I will cover some of the new sideboard tools that Modern Horizons 3 brings with it in the end of the video, so stay tuned for that. Now let's talk some Modern Horizons 3 decks for Timeless. Everyone loves a good life gain deck, and boy are we getting some sweet new tools for Soul Sisters. Guide of Souls is an actual Soul Sister type card, a rather power creep one actually. The ability to pump a creature and send it to the air is absolutely gonna be relevant, and the 2 points of toughness lets it survive Orcish Bowmasters. Ocelot Pride looks like a straight up ridiculous 1-drop with an incredibly high ceiling, although it unfortunately does get picked off by Bowmasters. Sorin of House Markov, also known as the Ravenous Neonate, is the biggest reason for this deck to be in black, and also likely just the best card in the deck. On the front side we're getting a really good body that even dodges Lightning Bolt with the 4 toughness, and on top of that he has both Lifelink and Extort, but we're mostly interested in the backside, so it's convenient that gaining 3 life in a turn is almost trivial in this deck. The backside also has Extort, which is a good ability in a deck with a low curve like this. Ticking up to make a food is kinda whatever, but the -1 that lets you deal damage to any target based on the amount of life you gained this turn is really pushed, considering how easy it is to flip Sorin. This will often be enough to just one-shot kill your opponent in a fetch land format, but it can also deal with any problematic creatures or planeswalkers, and it only costs you 1 loyalty, which is kind of insane honestly. Just an incredible card. Static Prison is a bit more on the speculative side, in this deck at least. It's a really efficient and versatile removal spell, but I'm not sure we're quite there with the energy support. Guide of Souls does have the ability to produce a lot of energy, and with the way it's worded you can only ever use its pump ability once per combat, so having additional ways to utilize energy could be a good idea. That's also the reason for the Aether Hubs in the mana base, which also produce a little bit of energy as well as color fixing. I also think that the 2 turns you get from Static Prison by itself could just be enough, a reasonable amount of the time actually, but if it turns out to be too awkward having to pay 1 energy each turn to actually play Static Prison, I'll probably just play some Swords to Plowshares in its place. As for the rest of the deck, we got more Soul Sisters with Soul Warden and Lunark Veteran that unfortunately both died to Bowmasters. We also got some Giver of Runes to protect our important creatures against Bowmasters and all the spot removal in the format. Voice of the Blessed is our primary big beater and one of the best life gain payoffs, and of course we're jamming Orcish Bowmasters and Thoughtseize since we're already splashing black for Sorin. Bowmasters adding 2 bodies to the battlefield is also amazing with all the Soul Sister effects. Lastly, I think Cleric class looks kinda interesting in this shell. Getting 2 life with every Soul Sister trigger will quickly get you to the Sorin tick down 1-shot kill. Level 2 lets us throw around +1/+1 counters whenever we gain life, which is a fine backup plan for like grindy games. And for the really grindy games, level 3 lets us reanimate a creature, which provides the deck with a way to even get back Lurrus. So this all adds up to a potentially really explosive aggro deck with a pseudo combo finish with Sorin that's also quite resilient and has a lot of staying power. Definitely excited to try out a Soul Sister shell like this one in Timeless. Timeless may not yet have all the pieces that Affinity needs to work as well as the modern version, but Modern Horizons 3 brings us several new powerful tools for this archetype. We're of course gonna build the deck around abusing Simulacrum Synthesizer to flood the board with massive constructs and overwhelm our opponent. Kappa Cannoneer is an excellent addition to this type of strategy, and the fact that it's a staple in Legacy is a testament to its power level. It is reminiscent of your typical Affinity creatures, but the Ward 4 is basically hexproof, and the fact that it grows whenever an artifact enters the battlefield and it becomes unblockable makes it a potent threat, and you're often going to be casting it at a huge discount thanks to Improvise, and of course it triggers Synthesizer as well. It really checks all the boxes. We're also getting Fogmure Enforcer, another great synthesizer Synthesizer Enabler. Alongside Kappa Cannoneer and Old Mirror Enforcer and Thought Monitor, this puts us at a healthy number of high mana value artifacts that trigger Synthesizer, but in practice they're gonna be significantly cheaper or even free to cast. Ugin's Labyrinth might be one of the most broken cards in Modern Horizons 3, and even though the mana base for this deck is actually kinda awkward and pretty difficult to figure out, I think we need to make room for this. In theory at least. Let me explain. So getting to play an actual soul land allows for some incredibly explosive games, and it typically accelerates your deck exponentially, since the faster you develop a bunch of artifacts on the board, the faster you'll reduce the cost of your affinity cards, and it can quickly snowball out of control. That said, we need colorless creatures with mana value 7 or greater in order to enable it. We only have 8 such cards in the list with our enforcers, since Thought Monitor is not colorless. That's a bit less than ideal, I think, although probably still enough to play Ugin's Labyrinth. That said, there are a couple of slightly awkward consequences. Number one is the fact that we probably can't also run Darksteel Citadel in the mana base because we need a certain amount of blue sources for our deck to function properly. And playing artifacts in your mana base is really important in order to support the affinity cards, so then we have to play a bunch of bridges to also make sure we get the right amount of colored sources, but it's really awkward that they come into play tapped and kinda defeats the purpose of running a land that taps for 2 mana. Then there's also the fact that we're entering the world of scam, so going down a card could be problematic, although on the other hand, it's also a way to protect a card against hand disruption, since Ugin's Labyrinth allows you to get the imprinted card back later in the game. I'm still pretty confident it's correct to play Ugin's Labyrinth in a shell like this, but we will see once we get the cards. As for the rest of the deck, we got Ornithopter and Mishra's Bauble as our 0 mana artifacts, and then we got Retrofitter Foundry, which is both another explosive card alongside an Ornithopter, but also a really important card in the scam matchup. Moonsnare Prototype is some additional ramp and sometimes a piece of uncounterable interaction in the late game, and you absolutely need a little bit of interaction in the metagame we're entering, so we're also packing some Metallic Rebukes. Patchwork Automaton is an incredible snowball threat that grows gigantic in no time in a deck like this, and you can even cast it on turn 1 with Ugin's Labyrinth. All in all, this looks like a deck with real potential, although a little bit of Frogmite and Sojourner's Companion would certainly go a long way. Merfolk is yet to have its moment to shine in Timeless. Harbinger of the Seas might change that, as it is a powerful hate piece against greedy mana bases that also pairs amazingly with cards like Master of the Pearl Trident that gives the whole team Island Walk. And the fact that Merfolk is likely gonna be the best home for Flare of Denial could give the archetype what it needs to be an actual competitor in the format. We got multiple cards like Shoreline Scout, Silvergill Adept, and Merfolk Trickster that are primarily here because of their powerful Enter the Battlefield triggers that we're generally okay with sacrificing to counter the right spell. Voldalian Hexcatcher provides us with even more ways of interacting on the stack by sacrificing these creatures, and it's also another lord. Speaking of which, this version splashes green from Merfolk Mistbinder for a total of 12 2-mana lords, and also Collected Company, as it leans heavily into the aggro beatdown plan. Collected Company is also typically best in decks that are good at playing instant speed. We already mentioned Merfolk Trickster, Voldalian Hexcatcher that are both really good flash threats, and we're also packing a few copies of Tishana's Tidebinder, which is a phenomenal card in the format in my opinion. Its Stifle ability hits a lot of relevant things like fetch land activations, Planeswalker loyalty abilities, it counters Atraxa's Enter the Battlefield trigger, and also all the Evoke elementals, and much more. And Svaelun is an extremely powerful card, but only specifically in Merfolk, which is the reason it generally doesn't see any meaningful play. It's a card advantage engine on a well-statted body that's also indestructible the majority of the time, and it gives all your Merfolks Ward, which is a lot of quality packed into one card. I know I said I wouldn't include sideboards for these lists, however I want to make a shout out to Mistcaller, which I could see become a really good sideboard tool for the Merfolk deck with all the reanimates that are gonna float around. If we get something like Aether Vial added to the format at some point, I think we're talking Merfolk as a top tier deck, but as is, Merfolk certainly looks like it could be in the conversation for a solid tempo deck. For the sake of video length and viewer experience, I decided to limit myself to talk about 3 decks in this video, but I've got like a bunch more deck ideas. I'll just do a super quick dump of a few more here. Basking Brutescale is a super scary looking, very power-crept Scurry Oak that combos with a lot of things like Rosie or Heliod, and I could absolutely see this combo become a thing in Timeless. I also made this video where I talk about Basking Brutescale and the different ways you can abuse it in various formats. Energy is getting a lot of support in this set, and I could see a Jeskai deck with Lurrus as a companion be a real contender. We got Guide of Souls, Amped Raptor and Volatile Stormdrake as a solid creature package, and then we got Galvanic Discharge, Static Prison and Aether Spike as an amazing interaction package, and Tune the Narrative as a glue style cantrip. Another energy shell that looks promising is an Abzan list using Primal Prayers to go infinite with Guide of Souls and creatures that bounce themselves like Core Skyfisher and Acererak the Archlich. Death and Taxes is one of my personal favorite decks of all time, and it's what I play in Legacy, and I actually think there's potential for a Timeless version to be competitively viable. We've got a lot of the most important pieces like Thalia, Giver of Runes, Stoneforge Mystic and Swords to Plowshares, and now we're getting Solitude and Recruiter of the God, both amazing for this strategy. And then we're also getting a new card with White Orchid Phantom, which looks like a card with real potential. We're getting a lot of new MDFCs, and like everything else, these have also been power crept significantly. This means that something like a Goblin Charbelcher shell could become a lot more consistent with access to more MDFCs that come into play untapped. I don't know exactly what the shell would look like, but I'm imagining something in green-black so you can play like Dark Ritual, Besiege the Mirror and assemble the team to combo off fast and consistently. As promised, I'll quickly run through some of the relevant new sideboard tools we're getting with Modern Horizons 3. Vexing Bauble is a big one. It's really effective at hitting on a reasonable portion of relevant stuff in the format, like Omniscience and the Evoke Elementals, and it's even main deckable, since you can always cash it in for another card. It is symmetrical though. It looks like a card that's really good in Lurrus decks, but then again you're turning off your own Mishra's Bauble, so be mindful in evaluating whether or not that's actually gonna be worth it. Dismember is likewise a sweet card to see on Magic Arena, primarily because it's efficient spot removal that everyone has access to. So if you're planning on building something like the Merfolk deck we just covered, this is probably a solid option, as that deck doesn't have a lot of ways to efficiently deal with opposing threats. It's probably also going to be good for Death Shadow decks. Consigned to Memory is a power crept ceremonious rejection to the point where I think it hits enough stuff that it could be worthy of consideration for a few sideboard slots, depending on how the new metagame shapes out. It's pretty sweet that it's designed to work well against like the big Eldrazi that has these cast triggers like Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, so you can replicate it and counter both the trigger and the spell for just 2 mana. Toxic Deluge is probably gonna be among the best sweepers in the format, and there's certainly a lot of black decks that are seeing play that could take advantage of something like this in the sideboard. Null Elemental Blast is pretty narrow, but really efficient and versatile. It deals with Deathrite Shaman, Atraxa, Minsc and Boo, Oko for a single mana, and it's both a counterspell and spot removal. Also, all the new Flipwalkers are multicolored when they're flipped, so it's good against those as well, just not on the stack in that case. Winter Moon is a tool available to everyone as a way to punish greedy mana bases. Again, the relevance of this card highly depends on how the metagame shapes out, but you should definitely have this on your radar as well. Disruptive Flute is the latest take on a Pithing Needle style effect, and it's a really good one in my opinion. The fact that you can play it out and tax the mana cost of whatever you're trying to hate on preemptively and at instant speed makes it really attractive as a hate piece against certain planeswalkers we've already mentioned a couple of times in this section, and it's also sweet against things like Stoneforge Mystic and whatnot. If you have some sweet brews you feel good about, please share down in the comments. Now go watch this video where I break down the ins and outs of Scam in Timeless so you're prepared for what's coming. Thank you kindly for the view, happy brewing, and until next time.